welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to show you how to make these bell bottoms. They're a little bit different than ones I made before in that they're elephant bells. How many of you remember those from the 70s? At least what I remember, the extra wide ones were called elephant bells, and that's my favorite. In fact, in the 70s I actually had a pair of purple corduroy elephant bells and I just loved them. So today I'll show you how I made these. Alright, so these are the jeans I'm going to use. They're a nice dark blue. They're really comfortable. It's a Dreamy is the brand, if you're familiar with that brand in Australia. And what I've done first is tried them on and marked with a straight pin here, just exactly right below my knee. That's where I want the flares to start. And for this particular pair of jeans, that makes it 18 inches from the bottom of the jean. So I'm just going to make a mark. Oh, we can pull that pin out now that we've got our measurement. And I'm just going to line up my 18-inch mark with the bottom edge of the pants. And close to the seam here, I'm going to put a mark right there. Now I'm going to put an insert on both sides of the pant. So I'm going to want to do that again on this side, on this seam here. So line up my 18-inch mark with the bottom of the pants. And then just put a mark right there across the seam. So what I'm going to do, you can just cut, say about a 1/4 inch away from that seam, cut all the way up there if you prefer. I'm actually going to seam rip that. I'm going to pick that seam out because I like having the extra bits of the seam from inside to use for my seam allowance when I sew in the new pieces. I'm trying to keep the biggest width I can on these to make sort of my elephant bells. Now, the next thing to know, how big do I want them to be on the bottom? Well, you can make them as wide as you like. I'm going to look at the existing size of the pant bottom. Okay, so while it's laying flat, for me, that's exactly 9 inches. And since there's two sides to that, that means the circumference right now is 18 inches. I want the biggest bell I can have. I want it sort of like an elephant bell, if you remember those. So I'm gonna, if you have plenty of fabric to choose your sizes from and you wanted to go as big as, say, you know, a 40-inch circumference, then you would need this piece to be 20. So you'd have to measure that out and figure out how wide your inserts are gonna be. Remember, I'm using 2. In my case, the donor jeans that I'm using are not particularly wide legs to begin with. So I can only add as much as I have. If you were using, like I say, and you had plenty of material to choose from, then what I would do is get yourself some paper like this and make a pattern. What I've done here is I've drawn a line in the center. 18 is the length I need to cover that space, and I've given it an extra inch for seam allowance here, and just to make sure in that triangle bits at the top I've got plenty and don't leave a hole. So that's what I would do first, is make your line as long as yours needs to be, in my case 19, and then decide how wide you want the bottom to be. Say if you wanted it 10 inches, well then you'd make a mark at 5 inches here and 5 inches here away from that center line. And then you just line up the center point there with your line over here. And connect that. And you do the same on this side. And you'd cut that out. And that would be the pattern you'd use for cutting your triangles that you're going to insert in here. Now, I didn't mention, obviously, you need seam allowance on the sides as well. So assuming you're going to leave a 1/2 inch seam allowance, if this was 10 inches wide, you're going to get a 9-inch piece. So that's how you'd make your pattern if that's the way you want to go. I'm just going to make mine as wide at the bottom as my jeans allow. So I've got my little marks here at the 18 inch. I'm just going to transfer that over to the other leg as well. And on that outside seam. Now again, you could cut yours if you want to. Because I'm going to seam rip them, I want to make sure I don't go any further than this mark I've made. So I'm going to put a pin through it on each one of those marks, just through the top layer. Now, the reason I'm doing that is I'm going to start ripping this seam, but after a while I find it easier to kind of go from the inside, and I may not see that mark when I get close enough up there, so I want to make sure that pin shows me where it is. Okay, so go ahead and cut yours or seam rip it if you're choosing to do like I am. Okay, change of plans. I was going to seam rip this all the way up, but I've just put a slight hole right at the seam. So I think I'm just going to, rather than chancing that anymore, I'm just going to try cutting them. And I'm going to go right on that seam, right just to it, like I should say, just to this side of it. There we go. And just cut all the way up to my mark. Just right to that mark. Now the same on this side. This is a different kind of seam. You don't see the stitching on the outside like you do on this one. And I can see on the inside that it's folded over. So I'm going to do the same thing in here and cut that seam loose just a bit. So I can flop it whichever way I need to. So that inner seam is folded over. Just make sure it's out of your way if you're trying to leave it there. And again, I'm going to cut just to the right edge of this seam. All the way up to that mark. Now we'll just do the same on the other side. Make sure whatever seam, on this top one I left the seam on this side, and on the back panel I left it on that side. I'm just going to try and mirror that here. Okay, so I've got those two cut open just up to my mark. So we'll set these aside for now. Okay, so these are my donor jeans that I'm going to be using to make the inserts. So I've just sort of lined that up with the 1 inch, or the, I should say the 0 mark at the bottom of my cutting mat here. And if I cut up 19 inches, remember my opening is 18, I'm going to go an extra inch for seam allowance. That puts me right on this 17-inch mark here. So I'm just going to run this across here and cut those off. There's my first leg. We'll do the same with the other one. And you can even lay this one on top if it's easier. But either way, it's the same place. Save these for another project. Now I'm going to just turn these inside out. I can see the seams a bit better. You've always got the front of the leg is narrower than the back of the leg. So this is currently the back of the leg, the wider piece. So I'm just going to cut up along this sort of blue line here and open these up. So you can see again, that's the back side of the leg because it's wider. That's the front. And now I'm going to cut these apart as well so that I've got two inserts, and I'm going to use the smaller one on the inside of the leg. I'm going to end up cutting that seam off anyway because I don't want to have to sew through it. So it really doesn't matter which side you're going to cut on both sides of this one anyway. And now I'm just going to cut these seams off of this inside panel as well. I'll cut over a bit first so I can save as much as I can of the bottom. It really won't matter so much up here since we're going to make a triangle out of it, but as you get down to the bottom, you want to get as close to the edge and save as much fabric as you can if you're trying to make a really wide bell like I am. Same thing on this one. Okay, so that leaves you with one wider and one narrower panel. We're just going to repeat that on the other leg. Now I do have a paper template here that's 19 inches to give me an extra inch at the top. And this is 10 inches. My pieces, of course, are not that big, so I can only have it as wide as the bottom is going to be. So if you had a wider piece available to you, it's worth making a template like this to cut out your triangles. For my purposes, I'm going to put these two narrower ones on the inside pant leg and these two wider ones on the outside. And I like to leave the original hem on the bottom since it's still there on the jeans that I'm working with. So I'll start with one of these. And I'm just going to sort of fold them in half and find the center here. And I'm just going to put a little pin in there for now. Okay. So that's the center point at the top. I'm just going to take my chalk, my little marker here and try to mark that if I can. That works well. Then I don't need the pin. All right, same thing on the bottom here. I already know that that is 8 inches wide. So I'm going to mark it about at the 4-inch mark there. That's just so I know where the center is here. So the next thing I want to do from my center point here, because remember we allowed an extra inch up here, is I'm just going to mark about 1/2 inch on either side of that line. And that's to keep my 1/2 inch seam allowance on either side of that center point. And I'm going to take from this one down to the very bottom corner here. Now this is on the inside and it won't show. You certainly could use a pen. It's never going to show up anyway. It'll get sewn into the seam. And now I'm going to use my other mark over there to go down to the bottom of that side. Now I'm just going to lay this ruler on that mark again and cut that out. This side as well. And there's your first insert of the larger piece. Do that on the other one as well. Well, actually, you're going to repeat that on all of them. I'll repeat that process on this one. I'm just going to use a pen so you can see the marks a bit better, but I'll take the one I've already done and lay that opposite now to this one. So wrong sides together. And just put a little mark here and here. And then just like before, I'm going to use this outside mark to draw a line to that corner, and this mark to draw a line to that corner. Now you could just cut it in one go if you like to. I just wanted to show you sort of the markings on it. So that's the shape I'm going to be cutting out. Okay, so there's my 4 pieces cut out. You'll have 2 wider ones and 2 narrower ones. Now the next thing is to pin them into your jeans. So I'm going to turn them inside out. If you wanted your seams on the outside so they could fray, well, then you'd want to pin wrong sides together, but I want to pin the right sides together. So again, these jeans are inside out now. There's your crotch coming all the way down here. This is the inside seam. So that's where I want the smaller one to go. And I'm just going to start right down at the bottom. So you can see I've got 2 really, really thick seams down here. And if I was to put those together, that would be awful to sew through. But this is where I kept that inside seam allowance on this jean. It's just lining up the bottom edge. So I know my pants will be even on the bottom. And then I'm just going to line up these side seams here and pin. And follow that all the way up to the top. Now when you get to the top, that's the end of the slit there. I'm just going to go ahead and pin this and stitch it up as far as I can go. Okay, so I've got that one pinned all the way up to the top, as I said. Now I'm going to fold this top back and take one of your bigger pieces. Again, right sides together, but I want to attach it on this side. We'll actually flip the pant leg over. I want to do it on this side like we did the other one, so that we end up with it outside like this. My hope is, in pinning just one side on this leg, this side of the leg, and one side on this side of the leg, once I get it sewn all the way up there, I shouldn't need to pin the other side. I should be able to just flip it around and come back down the other side. That's my hope anyway. We'll see how that goes. So again, I'm just lining up the bottoms and then this side edge. Using the inseam on the inside. Go all the way up like that. So again, when you get really close to the top, keep an eye, there's the top of my point. That's all right, I'm just going to keep pinning it all the way. Now again, I'm going to not pin the other side just yet. So we've got one panel added to the back side of the leg and one to the front side. I'm not going to pin the other leg yet. I want to sew these first. So let's go inside. Now I've just pulled this top pin out because it's really close to where the fold is in the material there. I'm going to want to move it because I don't want any of this, see how this easily folds up in here, and I don't want that to get sewn into the seam. So I'm just going to press that down really flat, and I'm going to move this pin way back here to hopefully keep that fabric from creeping up on me as I start this seam. Now I do have gold thread in here, but honestly we're sewing on the inside, so no one's going to see this anyway. You could use whatever color thread you like. And you can see where this gold thread comes down here, and right about where it hits that top of this fabric, that's where I'm going to want to start sewing, right here. And I'm just going to follow it down from there and keep going all the way down. Again, that pin is just helping to hold this fabric in the back away from the seam, so I don't sew my leg together. Do be careful, you've got pins in this side over here as well. Oh, I'm just gonna go, yep, I can see where that gold thread is there, and I'm trying to line it up with my needle. So we pick up just about in that same spot. If you're not positive you're lined up with that gold thread, pull the material forward just a bit until it looks like it's lined up with where your needle's gonna fall. Now I've got a little mark on my plate here showing me where that needle's gonna come down. So I'm gonna try and line it up there, but I'm also gonna take a look at this, the edge of the presser foot here, and just see where that fabric falls. As long as I keep this lined up in about that same position as I go down, I should have the same seam allowance, but it's really not critical. Go forward a couple, back, and then go. Now again, I don't want this needle in the way, this pin here, but I just need it to hold that fabric away from there as long as I possibly can. And again, I'm just letting the fabric fall on the right of my presser foot about the same distance it was when I had it lined up back there. We'll have to pull the pins out as we go. And I can feel the ridge underneath there, and that's just the other side. Again, wanting to make sure the other side of the fabric is not in the way at all. It's only going to be tight right up at the top of this triangle. Yeah, I can feel it there. So make sure it's pushed to the left, out of the way. And let's go. Now that I'm a little ways away from that top, I can pull that pin out, and I don't have to worry quite as much. Just make sure you keep your fabric as flat and smooth as possible, and you can feel the ridge underneath there as you go. Now I've got two really thick seams here, and because of the way I've lined up the seam allowance with the edge here, they're not perfectly in line with one another, and I don't want to sew over anything that thick in any case. So I'm just going to go as far as I can and then backstitch. You may have to use your hand crank here till I get right up to the edge, just where I start hitting this thick part here, and then I'm going to backstitch. And again, it's just because it's so thick right in there that I'm using the hand crank. Now we can pull that out and snip those threads. Come way up to the top and cut those threads as well. I'm just pinning the bottom edges, lining up the two bottom edges on the other side now of that same panel where I didn't pin, and I'm just pinning the two bottoms together. I am going to put a couple of pins up here. And then from there, I'm just going to line these edges. I'm I'm not putting near as many. I'm only putting a few down this edge just to sort of ensure they stay together. Because remember now up here, my hole, the top of the point starts right here. I don't have anything that goes beyond this part here. So the next thing I'm going to do is sort of taper this piece right up where it goes past here, because I won't have anything to sew onto here in any case. Now remember, my point stops way down here and the fabric goes past that. So what I'm kind of doing here as I line this up, I'll put another one in just to make sure we're staying in the right spot here. There we go. Up until I get to the top here. And I'm going to pull that out. Okay, and just sort of pin that where it starts at the top here. Now you can see what I mean by that jean sort of is a bit flat in there. And I'm just going to lay this piece down as flat and smooth as I can. I won't be able to keep that pin there. In fact, I'm going to turn it around so I can pull it out from the other side. But I just want it in there long enough to get this piece started. That's the only tricky part, is just getting this to lay as smooth and flat as you can at the very top here. From there on, it'll be smooth sailing. Don't worry about that excess sticking out. We'll cut that off when we're done. So I'm going to start. That's the bit where my point starts right there. I'm going to come maybe a centimeter, half an inch, whatever, somewhere on this side of that fabric and start there. There. Back it up. Okay, so I can pull this pin now. And from here on, I don't necessarily need the pins in there. You just want to make sure the rest of your excess fabric is out of your way. Now the same thing, I've got those really thick bits. I'm just going to go as close to them as I can, backstitch, and not worry about them just yet. Back here and cut these pieces again where I started. Now I will be cutting this extra fabric away, but I want to see how it looks on the other side first. So I've just flipped it so I can see how that corner's laying. So I can put my finger up inside there a bit, but then it does hit the opening. So I can feel my finger going through to the other side. So I do need to close that more. So what I'm going to do to fix that is push that fabric down as smoothly as possible and pin it from this side. And again, that's just to try and keep it out from under my needle, if at all possible. I'm going to come from this side, pick up in the gold thread here, and just sort of head up towards where this gold stitching is here. So I want to join that stitching to this stitching. It will go a little bit on that there. That's okay. So we'll be catching just a little bit of this edge in here, but that's how we're going to close that gap. Now, if you're not worried about having little gaps or puckers in yours, you don't have to do all this. I'm just doing my best to keep that as smooth as possible. So again, I'm going to come where this thread ended up here. That's where I've stopped on that piece, and try to get it to join up here. Pick up right about there. And keeping the rest of the jean out of the way as much as possible, I'm going to try to come right up to here. Let's see how that looks. Now, because this is still open, I haven't sewn the other side yet, we can kind of get an idea of how that's going to lay. That's pretty good. I'm happy with that. Now we're just going to repeat that on the other side. So as I said, on this seam, I was able to go all the way down to the bottom. So those are already fully connected. Here where I wasn't able to, I'm going to have to figure out, this little part is going to have to come off. Because I want to be able to lay these flat and just join those. And because of how thick this is, I'm not going to be able to do that. So I'm going to cut some of the excess off of this one on the inside. And see if I can't just stitch over that to get those to lay flat. And for this, I'm just going to look at that gold line there and try to line it up somewhere in the same area. And now it's going to be a little tricky, but we'll just see if we can't get that to join here. All right, so it's really thick right here, but I just want those to kind of lay flat and stay together. So I'm actually just going to do a hand crank here. Just a few times forward and back. And that should help keep those together. And same thing on this one. Anywhere the two pieces were too thick to actually sew together at the time, I'm just going to cut down the thickness of this inner one and stitch them together. All right, so that's one leg done. And look at the size of that bell. I think I'm going to be happy with that. Repeat the entire process on the other leg. Yeah, finish the other leg. So the last thing to do before we turn these right side out and have a look at them is this excess fabric I've got here on this side now. So the first side we sewed, as you know, it was close to the edge, so it's all the way up there. And then it's this second side where we've got this excess fabric on there. I don't want to cut too close to the seams. Maybe leave a 1/4 inch or so. We're going to go around that anyway. So say a 1/4 inch away from that, just cut some of this excess off at the top here. In fact, you can turn it over if you want to see how close it came before you started. I wouldn't go any further than this top bit here because we're going to close the edges anyway. We're going to finish them. And that's optional. You don't have to if you don't want to, but these are going to continue to fray on the inside. So what I like to do is I've set my machine on the widest zigzag. For me, that's a 4. Your machine will be different, I'm sure. You could use a serger if you prefer, but since I'm already here at the machine and I'm just going to run a zigzag over the edges, it's just easier, I think, with the jeans. So again, I've got a zigzag stitch and I'm setting it so that as it comes over on the right, it's going to go back and forth with a zigzag. Every time it comes to the right, you want it to come right on or over the edge of this fabric. Okay, so I've got to make a little adjustment there. There we go. That right one, when it comes to the right, is coming right over the edge of my fabric, and that's what I want, so it closes this outside edge. Can you see that right there? Getting a nice zigzag stitch right on the edge to close that so it doesn't fray any more than necessary. I'm just going to continue all the way down, flip it over to the other side, and all of my other seams as well. Okay, finished product. As you can see, they are now very wide bells. I think I was reading something online, the difference between flares, bell bottoms, and then elephant bells. I think they said flares, the total circumference would be, I think, anything up to 22 inches. And then from 22 to 25 or 26 is considered bell bottoms, and anything bigger than that are considered elephant bells. So technically, these are elephant bells, because that's nearly 15 inches across right now. So that would make them almost 30 in circumference. That's pretty cool. So here's the finished product. What do you think? I love them. I'm a big bell bottom fan though. I just can never have too many. I love how they turned out, and you could always experiment with them and try different denims in them. They're extra wide, which is my goal here, but you could get really experimental with it. You could use contrasting denim. You could use denim that has patterns on it. In fact, I made another pair where I did just that, and I'm going to show you right now. So here's another pair that I made essentially following the same style, for the most part anyway, but the panels in this one were cut from a pair of jeans that had lots of colors all over them and everything. I find really cool patterns a lot in the thrift store, but they're often in very tiny sizes. So here's a way I can incorporate them into things that I can wear, and I really like the flare it gives them. So I hope you liked this. If you did, give the video a thumbs up, and I hope you come back for more.